Live from sunny Live Oak, Florida, it's the ProArms Podcast.
Hi, everybody, and as Chris said, it is another episode of the ProArms Podcast. Our subject is Dr. Richard Carmona. Now, for those of you who don't recognize the name, probably his most high-profile public persona was when he served as the Surgeon General for the U.S. under George Bush from 2002 to 2006. But as impressive as that may be, I did want to say a little bit about the fact that was only a little small piece of his biography, which is very impressive.
You know, Steve, I got to tell you, of all the people I've met and all the people we've interviewed, he impressed me more than anybody else.
Oh, cool. There's a lot of good stuff here, but I want to just give you a little quick background on Dr. Carmona because he started out in New York, certainly not from a privileged background of New York, had to work his way up off the street, so to speak. Got his GED when he first went in the Army. He was an Army medic, Special Forces medic, followed up on his education, became a nurse, a paramedic, finally a doctor. And while all of this other stuff is going on, which would be enough for most people, he was also spending a career as a deputy sheriff with the Pima County Sheriff's Department out there in Tucson, Arizona. And this incident, when he starts talking about being off duty, the first thing I thought was, doctor, off duty? Well, yeah, he's a deputy sheriff who was off duty at the time. Within the sheriff's office, it just so happens he was an investigator. He was a SWAT team leader. He's a SWAT medic. He was a medical director for their department, as well as, I think, a couple others, and has continued in his medical profession almost as a separate but connected dual career with his law enforcement. So here we have a highly unusual individual who has been trained from the standpoint of tactical response, tactical medicine, firearms use, seems like all the right stuff to deal with this kind of a situation, and at the same time had the medical background, which what kind of led him into how this incident unfolded anyway. Here you go, folks. Mass with Dr. Richard Carmona.
Gang, we're in Tucson, Arizona with Dr. Richard Carmona. You've heard from Steve some of his background, and we're sitting here near the shooting scene today, and I've asked him to share a story. Dr. Carmona, welcome to the ProArms Podcast.
Happy to be with you.
Can you tell us a little bit, set the stage for what happened that night at Grant and Campbell?
Sure. I was off duty. I was in my unmarked police car. I was heading westbound on Grant Road near Campbell in my unmarked police car. I was in civilian clothes, shorts and a polo shirt, which became important later. And as I came across the intersection, it was 6 o'clock in the evening on a Saturday evening. It was 1 hour before the University of Arizona football game, so the traffic was entire gridlock in the area, with literally hundreds of people in the street crossing and going toward the game. The stadium was only a couple of blocks away. And I witnessed a three-car collision that was going eastbound on Campbell and Grant. So like all of us who are off duty...
Eastbound on Campbell or Grant?
It was going east. The collision was eastbound on Grant at the intersection of Grant and Campbell. And like most guys when they're off duty, you take a look and decide, should I stop or not? And if people look okay, you move on, maybe you call it in. But I saw injured people sitting on the curb. A lady had blood on her head. And I thought, well, I better stop and at least make the scene safe. So I put my code equipment on and I drove into oncoming traffic to prevent cars coming too close from the injured, and redirected traffic and identified myself to everybody as a police officer, showed my badge, got on the radio, called for meds, and called for uniform backup for traffic control. All the usual things that you would do. And I decided to just stay and give first aid. As I did, people started running over to me and screaming that the guy had a gun, and I didn't know what they were talking about because I thought I was stopping at just a 3-car collision. And I listened, and so I just felt unsafe. So I went back to my car, and I took my service weapon with me. At the time, I had a Colt 45, Series 70 model 1911. And I just put it into my belt, and I put my badge on my belt, and I had my flat badge to identify to the people that I was an officer. Because at that point, I was very concerned that being in civilian clothes with a gun in the middle of an intersection, it might provoke somebody to do something. And as I got more intelligence from people, and literally people were holding on to me and screaming and crying that the guy had a gun, but I didn't see anybody with a gun. So as I got more intelligence, I said, all right, stay there. I put it out over the air that allegedly this person in 10 code was 1032, that he had a weapon. Couldn't see him. So I started, there was 3 cars, and the middle car was a pickup truck. And it was blacked out windows, which are illegal here. And I started calling from about 15 yards away, come out of the car, come out of the car. So I wasn't sure if somebody was in there injured, had a head injury or something. And I waited, and eventually I told the people, sit down at the curb, and I called to communications again, asked them for a backup as quick as they could. I could hear the sirens coming in the distance, but they couldn't get through because the traffic was all blocked. So I had my radio, I had it clipped in my hand, and I had my weapon, and I kept calling to the car, and then eventually the car door opened, and the guy got out of the car. In the reconstruction of the event, I was 18 to 20 yards from the door where he came out. And I called to him, showed my badge, and said, turn around, let me see your hands. He had his back to me, and he had his hands in front of him, kind of where his crotch is, and he wouldn't show me his hands. So I thought, well, either he's disoriented because of a head injury, or he's got something to hide. So I kept drawing down on him, and I said, let me see your hands, I'm a police officer. I went over the radio, said suspect non-compliant, 1032, I think, 1078 on the backup, meaning hurry up with the backup. And I put up over the air at that time, I said, be advised, let oncoming units know that who I am, and I'm in civilian clothes with a blue polo shirt, black shorts, and hiking boots, so that, some young deputy or some officer doesn't come in and see me as a threat. And he finally turned around, and I saw he had a semi-automatic pistol in his hand. And I kept screaming at him, saying, put the weapon down, put the weapon down. He squared off at me, and at that point, the investigators told me we were about 18 yards apart. And he locked on me, and he had that look that we call a meth stare, that I knew that this wasn't going to end well, because he was looking through me. And then he stood at me. He had his weapon pointing down to the ground, almost in a Weaver stance, but down, and he started rocking. And he just kept looking at me and rocking, and I kept saying, put the weapon down, I'm a police officer, I want to help you, put the weapon down. And must have screamed that out about 10 times or so. Had my badge up in the air, showing my badge, and I was shown to everybody in the street. And this intersection was packed with people. And so I was really worried that if it broke into a gunfight, I had no cover, I had no concealment, and there were just hundreds of people all over. There were no backstops for rounds going down range. And at that moment, it looked like he was going to give up, and he actually crouched his knees, and he pretended like he was going to put the gun down. And as
Right hand only?
Both hands. His both hands went down like this, and he was looking at the ground. But I was smart enough to stay up on him, engaged. And in a split second, he came up, fired the first round, grazed my head, blew out the windshield in my car, and then the gun battle began right then.
Now, you indicated your left temple.
Right here, just creased my left temple right here. Still got a little bump there. And it went right across my temple and went and took out the windshield of my car, which I was standing a few yards behind the trunk of the car. And my car was pointing west. And so at that point, I dove to the right. I didn't have any covering concealment. People started screaming. They were running. And I fired 2 rounds, and I hit him. And I believe the first 2 rounds hit him in his shoulder. He spun with the double tap, and he came around, and he started to go down, but then he came up on me again to fire again, and I double tapped him again, and I got him this time in the groin, in the left groin. That dropped him to his knees. I rolled again, and I didn't have a stable shooting platform. I was kind of at an angle and looking down because I kept trying to get out of his sight picture because he was tracking me. I kept trying to get out of the sight picture, but there was no cover or
When
concealment.
you say roll down, you're kind of ducking down to it.
Oh no, I actually rolled. I dove, I rolled, and I came back up because he was locking on me. He was doing this tracking, and I was like totally vulnerable. I'm in the middle of an intersection. There's no cover concealment, and I know that there's people standing behind me, all around me. So I rolled. I came up, but it wasn't far. I mean, none of it. I don't think I went further than about 2 table lengths, at all, right here, which maybe was 10 or 12 feet. But rolled, and then when I came up on the third time, I was assuming he was hit by how he acted, but the guy was tough. He stayed in the battle to the end. He came up again. He went down, and when he was with it, first double tap, second double tap. And then the third time, I think, is when I got him center punched to right here. And the ME said that's probably what killed him. They got his aorta in his heart. And so the problem was never being in a stable shooting platform, worried about all the people behind. And as I was firing, I was trying to, without a sight picture, fire from a very low position with a trajectory for the rounds going skyward so that I wouldn't hit anybody if there was a miss of all the people that were there.
You were sort of looking over the gun?
Like this, and just looking over the front iron sight at an angle, and just trying to keep a sight picture on him, but keep me out of his sight picture. And then, so after those 3 conditions, and the interesting thing was, he was on the ground, and on the ground as he was dying, he was still in the fight. He was looking for me. He was flat on the ground, and his head was like this, and the weapon was here, and he was still looking for me. And then he dropped. And at that point, in between all of that, I didn't tell you, I had put out, when the first shot was fired, I had the radio, and I put out a 998, which is, in our parlance here, shots fired. And then I threw the radio down, and I said 999, 999, which is officer needs assistance, extreme, life-threatening situation.
It's like a New York 1013.
Yeah, 1013 New York, equivalent 1013. So I just dropped the radio, and then what happened was something interesting where your training kicks in. So I saw the patrol car the first patrol car that was coming in, couldn't get me. They actually went up on the sidewalk, and they came up on that sidewalk right there. And they came up on the sidewalk because they couldn't get through traffic. And I see the lights. And during that time, I stayed on him at a distance of probably 15 to 20 yards because this all occurred at about a 15 to 20 yard interval from the threat. In those few seconds that there was a lull in the gunfight, and I didn't remember it, they told me, in my trunk, like most of the SWAT guys, I knew where all my magazines were, and I did actually a blind combat reload. I went to the back of the trunk, because when the investigating officers got my weapon, they said, "You have a full clip here. How'd that happen?" And I said, I didn't take a clip with me, but people reported that I went back to the trunk when there was a lull, and out of training, I had dropped the old mag, which was at the, and I did a combat reload on him, and there were pictures of it actually, people with their cell phones, and so it was something we used in training, how it gets ingrained, that, I had a lull in the gunfight, I had a magazine, that I knew had expended most of the rounds, and I did this combat reload, and I held, and then when the first officer came at me, I was screaming. I remember holding my badge up and saying, I'm on the job. And when he saw me, he nodded, and I said, you take over. I said, I haven't cleared the car. It's black. I don't know if there's anybody else in there, and I put my weapon down, and my 45 down in the trunk, and I stepped back and just held my hands up, and then the place got swarmed with all the patrol officers. And he was just about dead. The ambulance came. They took him to the university, which is just a few blocks away. And at that time, I did not realize I was hit. But then somebody told me, you're bleeding. And I felt it, and I said, oh. And then I saw the hole in the windshield, and I said, well, that was probably one of that first. I thought it was the first round. And when it was reconstructed, that's what the thought was. As it turns out, when it was over and the investigators were there, the county attorney came and took a look and said, do you know who that was? I said, no. And he gave me the person's name, and he said, this guy's a 3-time offender. He just got out of prison. And when they reconstructed the story, I was told that he had gone to his father's house when he got out of prison. And that day he had killed his father and stole the pickup truck that he was driving and took his father's weapons. He was on his way to kill a former girlfriend who had testified against him. And he had told his present girlfriend, that if the effing cops try and stop me, I'm going to take as many of them as I can with him. With him. And we didn't know that. And when, I think I told you in the beginning, we saw the silhouette in the car through the black thing, and I wasn't sure if he was injured. He was actually in the front seat loading magazines. The front seat was filled with guns and ammunition. And he was loading weapons and ammunition, which I never cleared the car, so I can't tell you, but the investigating officers who saw it were the ones that told me.
What sort of gun was he shooting at you?
It was a 9mm semi-automatic, and I think it was a Beretta, but I'm not sure. But it was a 9mm semi-automatic. You know, just at a distance, I could tell. I couldn't tell you the make, but I knew it was, you know, it was a real threat.
How many shots did he get off?
I only heard the first one. I can't tell you.
Did they ever reconstruct that?
They, you know, to be honest with you, I don't want to. I don't remember what the count was, so I don't remember. But I remember people asked me that, and like in most gunfights, you hear the first one, and that's it. And then all you see is the muzzle coming at you, which always looks as big as a howitzer, as they keep trying to keep you in that sight picture.
You did experience some tunnel vision?
Oh yeah, no question. But I was fighting it because I recognized that the car was still a threat, and that's the important thing that I tell the kids now when I've taught over the years. That added to my ability was that you got to be careful of the tunnel vision because, as you know, there's sometimes more than one threat. And we hadn't cleared the car and it was blacked out, and he could have had a whole host of people in there with us. So I stayed focused on him, but I remember purposely looking at the car. And the second threat that I was worried about is that since everybody here in Arizona carries concealed, that somebody's going to walk on here and see two guys shooting and just shoot both of us, you know, because I'm not looking like a cop, I'm looking like a civilian with a gun. So it was fortunate that I didn't have any citizens who got involved in there other than taking pictures, which verified my account, and that the responding officers recognized me, and it worked out okay, and I didn't get shot. But my biggest fear that I was going to get shot as one of the bad guys.
How many rounds did you fire?
I believe it was 7.
How many
I put one. I know I missed at least one because I hit a car. Yeah.
How many times did you hit him total?
There were. I double tapped him 3 sets, so I think he had either 3 to 6 rounds in him. So each time, so it was shoulders. Right here, high chest left, groin left, center punch, 2, 2, 2.
Okay, you said though you fired 7 shots.
Yeah, I believe it was 7. It was 10 years ago. I believe it was 7 shots, and that was
the gun loaded with 8 or 9?
I had 8+1.
And that was Colt government model.
Colt government model, which I had used for years and years. It was what I used in the military. You know, we those were issued at the time, and we were transitioning to Glocks as well. But our department has a policy that of an array of handguns that you can carry as long as you qualify in them for both on-duty and off-duty work. But most of us old-timers like the Colt 45, you know, because of its ease of handling and so on. And eventually I did switch over to a Glock just because everybody on the team and, you know, the whole issue of sharing ammunition and so on. But still a fine weapon.
So Glock is what you carry today?
The duty weapon is a Glock, yeah. I have both a 9 and a 40 Glock. And then off-duty I have a pocket light, just a Colt 380 pocket light.
What ammunition were you using that day?
Copper, I can't remember the weight on it. It was the department issue was copper-jacketed hollow point round. And I can't remember, it was 146, 147 grain, I think. Because we don't use it anymore, so we don't have the weapon anymore, so I can't remember. But I think that's what it was.
Who would I talk to at the firearms training unit to find out what they issued for 45s back then?
Oh gosh, I could probably find out for you. I can make call and find out for you. It's as you know, it's nobody's there anymore from that unit, and a lot of the kids today never fired a 45. You know, so they're all Glockophiles.
Time goes on.
Yeah.
Now, did you experience auditory exclusion as well?
Oh yeah. There's no question, because I thought through all of that myself, and I haven't been in firefights in combat, but never a one-on-one firefight like that. And I can remember, you didn't hear anything. I didn't hear any of the shots. I didn't feel myself getting hit. And until it was over, and I talked to myself, okay, compose yourself, stay focused, look for other threats, make sure everybody knows that you're a cop, don't let this end badly now because something stupid happens. And I just, I would say that a lot of the years of training came back, and years of training got condensed into just 30 seconds. And I was fortunate because I remembered to do everything right and survived that, which turned out to be really a motorist assist in first aid and turned into a terrible gunfight.
You were quoted as having said you had a few sleepless nights over it. Can we talk about that?
Well, those things weigh heavily on you, and even being a combat veteran, it's still taking a life. And I think for those of us who are professionals, you always question, could I have done anything differently? Is there, even though the outcome was good for me, like in SWAT, even though you completed your mission, the challenge was always, could I have done it better? Could I have done it safer? Could I have done it faster? And so there were those questions, and the usual feelings of isolation and the press who treats you kind of harshly, and you're guilty until proven innocent, all of that. And so it was all of those things, but it was good. The department was great. A couple of days later, I went out to the range. I requalified. We went through our process, which is administrative leave, talk to the psychologist, go back on the range, requalify with your weapon, and everybody gets to look at you and say, okay, he's safe, and if not, and that started right around the time of my shooting. Before that, it wasn't as stringent, but I was one of the guys that insisted that it was, because I think it's to the officers in the department's best interest that, it's difficult to predict how any person's going to respond in the short term and the long term. And what we really want to make sure is that when they go back on duty, that they are not plagued with thoughts that will have them lag in their judgment by a second or two, or wait too long to take appropriate lethal force if they have to because they shot previously, those kind of things.
Did it have to go in front of a grand jury?
No. The county attorney came out on site, and the next day they called me. In fact, because I was on my way to teach at the NTOA, National Tactical Officer Association, that night I was flying out on a red eye to teach, and we were in Virginia Beach. And he said, you can go. I said, are you sure? He said, no. He said, this is clean. He says, we've got about a dozen witnesses out here, some with cell phone cameras. And, because people, he had the usual thing, did I identify myself? Did he shoot at me because he thought I was a bad guy? Well, they had cell phones that, with me screaming, I'm a police officer, put the gun down. Police officer, put the gun down. I want to help you. Put it repeatedly. So in this case, all the civilians with the cameras and cell phones helped the cop. And so it was easy. They just said, no, we don't have to go any place with this. This is a clean shooting. Everybody says the same thing. You came. And what's interesting, I didn't see the actual accident. I just saw 3 cars and people on the sidewalk. When I found out what happened was, the lady I saw that was bleeding on the sidewalk, she had been the driver of the first car. The second car was the suspect's car. He got out of the car after the accident. He pistol whipped her and tried to hijack her car. She threw the keys so that he couldn't get them. And then the two guys that were in the back car came up to help her and said, hey, leave her alone. And the people tell me, the suspect turned with the gun and said, I'm going to kill you, motherfucker. They ran. So all of that had dispersed. So when I pull up on the scene, all I see is injured people. And I said, well, I called it in. I got a 1050 here, which is an accident. Don't know how many injuries, send meds, send a supervisor, send traffic. And then it evolved from there. And then we found out at the end, the story I told you, that, he was actually in there loading his guns. And he knew he was a 3-time offender. He was going away forever. And he was going to take people with him.
No, he was only about 27, right?
He was a young guy with mental health problems and criminal record. And he had, what really, the thing that I remember that night when I was thinking was that, we're pretty close in town here. We know all the firemen and the paramedics. Had I not been riding through there, the first unit responding probably would have been a fire EMS unit, which is housed right down the block. And those firemen would have been killed. They would have pulled the car door open. They would have been shot. And they're friends of mine. And I just thought, it's kind of divine intervention, because normally I don't drive down that street. I was just stopping to see my daughter, and then I was going to the airport to fly out to go to the NTOA conference. So it was kind of all fortuitous that it happened. It just happened to be me, because anybody else might have gone up to the door and pulled it open. And he was sitting there with a front seat full of weapons and ammunition, and he would have just started killing people, and you would have had a barricaded subject in a car in the middle of an intersection.
How many years had you been using the 1911 before this incident?
Including my military time, 60, 78, 88, 21, 22 years, something like that with military.
Now, we hear a lot of people say that the 1911 is so complicated it's not a good gun to run under stress. I take it your experience was counter to that.
Well, I can understand where youngsters who are using some of the newer arms that are lighter, that don't have the thumb safety and things like that, I can understand. But when you grow up on it, starting when you're 18 years old, and that's all you knew through military and then early police career, and even back when in days when I started, some of the guys were still carrying wheel guns, and Smith & Wessons, the 38s, but I always had that 1911, and it just, even now I can tell you that when I'll shoot a Glock or I will shoot any other weapon, I'll find myself sometimes just dropping the thumb automatically. Just dropping the thumb automatically. It has no effect, but you just condition yourself, that muscle memory that you teach. It's just, this is how I know I have to do things. So for me, it wasn't. I found that it's a heavy weapon when it's fully loaded, but on the other hand, I think it's accurate, and you can drag it through the mud and the dirt. It's easy to break down and clean. And, when you start learning about it when you're 18 years old in combat and 19 and 20, and so it just becomes part of your life. And the other weapons you have to get used to later on, the weapons that don't have safeties that you got to be careful sticking in your belt, and pulling it out inside the trigger guard and things like that. So.
Do you recall at what point in the encounter you off-safed the Colt, and at what point your finger went to the trigger guard?
As soon as I came up on target, because you had a lethal threat before me. And I was giving him the benefit of the doubt because the muzzle was pointed at the ground. But quite frankly, as an instructor, I remember that when I did the self-beating of myself, after the first warning, I had every justification to shoot him then, even though the muzzle was pointing at the ground. Because you and I know, as it happened, he can come up faster than I can pull the trigger when he knows what he wants to do, and that's what happened.
Did you make any changes after that in your habits, like carrying off duty instead of leaving the gun in the car, or carrying spare ammunition?
No, not really. I mean, the good thing was, in my vehicle, like most of the SWAT guys, I had a holster clipped to the bottom of the seat in the front with the 45. So I knew it. I didn't. It's one of those things. I didn't have to look. If I needed it, it was there, and that's what I did. When I opened the door, I just reached. I knew where it was there. When I went and did my combat load into the trunk, my magazines were all against the back side, so I didn't have to look. When I just popped the trunk and I reached while I was still on target, and I did it. So again, the training kicked in. You just did what you've been training to do all those times, and I don't think I did anything. The thing that I was most critical of myself was I shouldn't have waited so long to deal with the lethal threat. But there was the doctor part of me was, well, he's in a car accident, he has a head injury, maybe he doesn't understand me, maybe he's scared. And then, of course, when he started to bend down and put it on the ground, it appeared, okay, he's complying. And then, in a split second, boom, there's the first round. So, the public doesn't understand, because we even had press and public commenting that I should have known better, that he was a mental health patient. I said, well, it doesn't make a difference if he was a Rhodes Scholar. He had a gun and he was shooting at me, okay? And I did everything I could to talk him down. So when I talk to the kids at the academy and everything, I tell them that because just to show them that if I had to be real critical of me for one thing, it was that I absolutely had the right to engage with lethal force prior to doing that. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt and risked my own life to do that, which probably wasn't a smart thing. But otherwise, I think all of my training and education over the years, recognizing that I could be perceived as a threat with a gun in the middle of an intersection with civilian clothes on, I put it out over the radio, I repeatedly announced to the public I'm a police officer, I showed my badge to everybody, I called it in, I got the backup there. So all of that stuff I think went well, and I just attribute it to the military discipline and my law enforcement training and my SWAT training, over the years. Otherwise I wouldn't be here today.
Have you ever done a training film that would be available for other departments?
We did some reenactments, and for a couple of years after the shooting, we actually used my shooting in some of our in-service training because it had so many elements of unanticipated encounters. Okay, and what do you do? And how do you, you're in civilian clothes and you're in a bank or you're in a movie theater. How do you identify yourself? When do you take action? And, all of those things. So we built a number of scenarios, including that one, and we actually ran them in our Hogan's Alley out at our range. I don't know if you've ever been to our range out here. It's really a nice, very advanced range. And, we have the storefront facade and the business facades and moving targets. And, we would challenge the kids on that and make them think through some of these complex things. So the experience served as a teaching case as well. But I don't know of any video that's been done, but we use the case to train.
Doctor, we certainly thank you for taking the time with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for all you do to keep us healthy and safe and educate everybody about firearms.
Okay, everybody, how's that for an interesting turn of events and involving what I think is, I agree with Gail. I haven't met the man, but he's certainly one of the most interesting interviews that I think we've had the chance to do here. So anyhow, we learned from other people's exciting experiences, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for joining us. See you, Gail.
Bye, Steve. Bye, everybody. ProArms Podcast music is by Kevin MacLeod.